ஒருவனாயுலகேத்த நின்ற நாளோ ஒருவனாயுலகேத்த நின்ற நாளோ ஓருருவே மூவரும் மான நாளோ கருவனாய் காலனை முன் காய்ந்த நாளோ காமனையும் கண்ணழலால் விழித்த நாளோ மறுவனாய் மண்ணும் விண்ணும் தெரித்த நாளோ மறுவனாய் மண்ணும் விண்ணும் தெரித்த நாளோ மான்மரிக்கை ஏந்தியோர் மாதொரு பாகல் திருவினாள் சேர்வதற்கு முன்னோ பின்னோ திருவாரூர் கோயிலாய் கொண்ட நாளே கோயிலாய் திருவாரூர் கொண்ட நாளே. This is a padal by Thiruvaroor or Appar that appears in the 6th Thirumurai, and it's a very interesting padikam itself, because in this whole set of 10 to 11 shlokas, Appar is asking Lord Shiva himself, directly conversing with him, and says how old this Thiruvaroor Kshetram is. When he came to Thiruvaroor, a lot of other places we have some sort of idea of when it came into being, but in Thiruvaroor he says this place is so ancient, so old, that even he is not able to figure out how old it is. He asks, the day that your single form existed and then gave rise to the Trinity, did on that very first day itself you come to Thiruvaroor? Or he asks, the day that you created the heavens and earth by making them spring out by your inherent power, was that the day when you came to Thiruvaroor? Or even more strikingly, he asks, generally it is the belief that Shiva and Shakti are inseparable halves of a whole, and they cannot exist without one another, as the very first shlokam of the Saundarya Lahari says. They are inert without each other. But just to make his point clear, Appar asks, did you come here before or after you united with Parashakti? And that is to say, did you come here before the beginning of time itself, if such a thing exists? So this is how ancient that Thiruvaroor Kshetram is. And there are Sthala Puranams that tell us how the Vigraha Murti of Tyagaraja came to Thiruvaroor. To reconcile these two, I think it is wise to think of it as the spirit of Shiva, as Tyagaraja Swami, existed in Thiruvaroor since time immemorial, but the Puranas tell us the story of how he came to be in the Vigraha Swarupam as Tyagaraja as we see him today. It's important to note that this story features both in the Skanda Puranam in Sanskrit by Vedavyasa and also in its Tamil version written by Kachiyappa Sivacharya. The Sanskrit version of the story has been brought into Carnatic music by a Mahan who was born and spent a significant part of his life in Thiruvaroor, which is none other than Mahan Shri Muthuswami Dikshitar. Among the many kritis that he has composed on this temple and the various deities in it, a very special place is occupied by the Tyagaraja Vibhakti Kriti set that he has composed on the central deity in this temple, which is Tyagaraja Swami or Thyagesa Peruman. In this set of kritis, he sprinkles the Sthala Puranam of this place in bits and pieces. Today we'll make a musical journey by putting these scattered pieces together to finally view Tyagesa's backstory as one complete, beautiful picture. So this story begins with Mahavishnu, ironically. Dikshitar says, Mukundadi Pujita Somaskanda Murtaye. The Somaskanda is one of the 25 forms in which Lord Shiva is generally worshipped They're known as the 25 Maheshwara Murtams, which sprang forth from Shiva himself. Out of his 5 faces, 5 forms from each face came out, and these are known as the 25 Maheshwara Murtams. And out of these 25, Soma Skanda is one of them, which means the form of Lord Shiva, where he is with his consort Devi Parvati and his son Subramanya. So technically, this Tyagaraja Vigraham is also a Somaskanda Murti, but in the Tevaram it is said, Ayyaindin Appurattan, the one who is beyond the 25. So such a special Tyagaraja Murti is given by Lord Shiva himself to Mukunda or Mahavishnu, because Mukunda prays to Lord Shiva and says, I want the boon of having a child. And so Lord Shiva gives him the Tyagaraja Swarupam and asks him to do puja to that, and so he will reap the benefits of it. So what does Mahavishnu do with this Vigraham is what Dikshidhar tells us next. Yogi Raja Hridayabja Nilayam. This particular form of Tyagaraja is placed in the Hridayabja, or the lotus-like heart of Yogi Raja. Who is Yogi Raja? It's a very important question that we must answer. Yogi Raja denotes Mahavishnu, and the reason for that is, if you see the Vishnu Sahasranamam, at the end Sanjaya recites a shlokam saying, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara. He calls Krishna Yogeshwara, or the Lord of Yoga. So the point is that Yogi Raja Hridayabja Nilayam. Mahavishnu brings that Swarupa, that Tyagaraja Vigraham, and he doesn't want to part with it, so he doesn't place it elsewhere. Instead, he places it on his chest as he reclines on the serpent couch and worships that Vigraham that is installed on his chest, which is why Hridayabja Nilayam. So as he worships, does he get the boon that he was worshipping for? Is his boon fulfilled? Dikshidhar further tells us, Marajanaka Pujita Mahadeva Manita Japanatana Prabhava. He says 2 very interesting things in this line. First is Marajanaka, which means it hints that Mahavishnu has got his wish because Mara or Manmatha is born to him. So Mahavishnu's address is Marajanaka. He worshipped Mahadeva as the first line. The second line says Manita Ajapa Natana Prabhava. This Ajapa Natanam is something very special because it is a dance performed by Lord Shiva without even getting up. Just in a seated position on his throne as Tyaga Raja, he performs this Ajapa Natanam. And how this came into being is also very interesting. As Mahavishnu was praying to Lord Shiva, who was placed on his chest, Mahavishnu's chest was heaving as he breathed in and out, and to the rhythm of that heaving or breathing, Mahadeva danced this Ajapa Natanam. This is the superficial meaning. To look slightly deeper, in the practice of yoga, one of the first things that are taught to practitioners is the regulation of breath. So it is to show that breathing is something so vital to us, and that must be brought into check and regulated. And Mahavishnu, being Yogi Raja, is the role model for this. And his breathing is so rhythmic and regulated that Mahadeva uses the rhythm of that breathing to perform a dance known as the Ajapa Natanam. So this is the great Ajapa Natanam. And further, Dikshidhar tells us the story. He says, Hari Vanchitartha Pradarajo. The story continues. He says, Muchukundadi Bhakta Jana Manoratha Purtaye. So to understand these 2 bits, we need to continue the story further. He says, first he said Hari Vanchitartha Pradarajo, the one who granted Hari the wish that he desired. So Hari or Vishnu gets Manmatha as his son. Further, at this time, Devendra comes rushing to Mahavishnu and says, an enemy is attacking me, his name is Valasura, and I've tried everything, but I'm not able to defeat him. So Mahavishnu gives him that form of Shiva, that Tyagaraja Vigraham, and says, do puja to this and you will reap the benefits. So Indra takes that Vigraham to Devaloka and offers prayers to it. And at this time he gets a piece of advice to bring Muchukunda Chakravarti, who is an emperor on Bhuloka, and Devendra wishes to bring him to Devaloka to fight the war against Valasura on behalf of him. So Muchukunda Chakravarti is invited. He's already an emperor who has received the grace of Lord Shiva in abundance, so he's extremely mighty, and he fights against Valasura and defeats him. Indra is overjoyed by this victory, and he tells Muchukunda to ask him any reward he pleases, and it will be given to him for the great favour that he's done. And Muchukunda Chakravarti, while roaming Devaloka, happens to chance upon the Tyagaraja idol that is there, and he's so enchanted and captivated by it that he comes to Indra and says, if there's anything you wish to give me that Tyagaraja Vigraham that you have in your possession. Now Devendra is alarmed. He says, it is not mine to give away, but it was actually Mahavishnu's and it's just in my possession now. But since I've given you my word, I will consult with Mahavishnu and get back to you by tomorrow. So he rushes to Mahavishnu and explains the situation. Mahavishnu, knowing all of this, tells Indra, create 6 more idols that are exact replicas of this Tyagaraja Swarupam, and if Muchukunda is able to identify which is the original, then he may take the idol. And Devendra does as instructed and creates 6 more idols, but it's almost as if Lord Shiva as Tyagaraja wanted to come down to Thiruvaroor, so he goes in the dream of Muchukunda Chakravarti that very night and tells him, you're going to be faced with such a test. To emerge victorious from this test, you must identify the correct original Vigraham. To do so, just go near the idols, and whichever idol you sense the scent of Sevandipu or chrysanthemums, that is the original idol. So with this piece of intel, Muchukunda Chakravarti comes to Devendra the next day, sees the 7 idols and identifies the correct idol using the clue that Paramashiva gave him. And Devendra, as promised, gives him the Tyagaraja idol and also the 6 replicas that he created. So Muchukunda Chakravarti comes down to Bhuloka with all 7 idols and installs them in 7 different kshetras. The original Tyagaraja Swarupa was installed by him in Thiruvaroor, and the other 6 in 6 other kshetrams, namely Trinallare, Nagapattinam, Tirukkaravayil, Tirukkuvalai, Thiruvaimur and Tirumaraikadu. So the 7 are installed and the original is placed in Thiruvaroor. And this brings us to the close on the story as to how Thyagesa Peruman arrived in Thiruvaroor in the Vigraham form as we see him today. To this day, the Sthala Puraanam that I just narrated is symbolically reflected in the temple and its rituals. In the temple, the Vigraham of Tyagaraja Swami is not actually placed in the Garbhagraham as most of us might think, but it is actually placed in the Ardha Mandapam. And the reason for this becomes clear if we hear a shlokam from the Vishwakarmyam Vastu Shastram. I'll just read out the shlokam. It says, Garbhagraha Shiraha Poktam Antaralam Galam Tatha Ardhamantapam Hridayasthanam Kuchisthanam Mandapo Mahan. Which means to say, the Garbhagraham is the Siraha Poktam or the head position in the temple, and the Ardhamandapam is the Hridayasthanam. If we imagine the temple entire layout to be like a reclining person or the human body, it is believed that it is actually the Virat Purusha or the primordial being, Purusha, who is reclined, and in that lying down form, the entire temple architecture is constructed. If we think that way, if we think of Mahavishnu as that Purusha who's lying down, the Garbhagraham is his head position, and the Ardhamandapam is his chest or heart position, Hridayasthanam. So, Tyagaraja Swami is placed in that Hridayasthanam to denote what happened in Vaikuntha that day, and the Garbhagraham is sealed off by a stone wall, and it is a mystery what lies behind it, but it is believed that it is Mahavishnu's head in that position. And even further, we spoke about the great Ajapanatanam. Even today, when Tyagaraja Swami is brought out of the temple in procession, he is brought out on a planquin-like structure, but the specialty is that it is not a planquin, but actually just a plank of wood on which the Vigraham is placed, and a single beam or stalk supports that rectangular plank, which is carried by a person and brought out. So, when in the time when the Devadasis were in this temple, they were the ones who were given the honor, not even the Shivacharyas or the many priests who were in the temple. It was the Devadasi, the head Devadasi, who was given this honor of carrying Tyagaraja Swami out. We'll discuss further the role of the Devadasi in the temple in coming episodes. But the Devadasi was the one who brought out Tyagaraja Swami in this very unusual vehicle. And the specialty is that since it was only supported by one trunk or stem, the Vigraham used to slightly wobble here and there, and that is supposed to denote the Ajapa Natanam of Tyagaraja Swami. So now I had mentioned how this tale has been narrated in both the Sanskrit Skanda Puraanam and in its Tamil version by Kachiyappa Shivacharya. Dikshithar has already sung this tale in Sanskrit through his Vibhakti Kritis. Now, to mirror the Puranas, which are in both Sanskrit and Tamil, I want to make a small contribution of my own to make the story easily accessible in Tamil for all the audience. I've simply taken Dikshithar's lyrics, which I sang throughout today's episode, and retaining their original ragam and tuning, I've converted the wordings to Tamil and made the talam uniform. So this is just a humble endeavor from my end, with all reverence to the brilliance of Mahan Shri Muthuswami Dikshithar, so that this tale that is in Sanskrit is made available to a larger audience in Tamil and in musical form. Mukundadiyar Pujita Somaskandamurtaye Yogirajan Hridaya Kamalam Nilayum Marajanakan Pujita Mahadeva Sirada Ajapanatana Pugar Petra Hari Nadiyavaram Tanda Arase Muchukundadi Bhaktargalin Manoratam Niraivetriya Nisadapa Sagari Gama Padani Dapa Magasa Rima Magasa Sani Dapa Sani Dani Sarima Pariga Garisa Parisani Sada Pagama Panipa Sagari Gari Sani Sadapa Gama Padapa Sam. So this is a short Tamil musical version of this whole tale that we saw today. Hope you all enjoyed the Sthala Puraanam of today's episode. Apologies for it being a little longer than usual, but I hope you enjoyed the Sthala Puraanam, and do join me again next week as we explore the precious and unparalleled hymns by the Tevara mover and see what they have to say about this extremely great Tyagaraja Kshetram. So until then, Tyagarajo Virajite, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.